Be careful what you all say.
I know.
Being recorded.
It's being recorded.
Big
All right.
Gonna know everything.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Samantha Johnston. I'm the Executive Director and Curator at Colorado Photographic Arts Center. And we're so excited to have you here this evening. This is going to be recorded and we are going to put it on the website. And if you have not seen Changing Landscape, if you're in Colorado, please stop by. The show is up until June 26th. And we do have normal gallery hours, and we are asking people who come in to still wear a mask, even though our mandates have just changed recently. So tonight, each artist will be sharing about their work and process, and then we'll have time for questions. So please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature or the chat feature to pose questions, and you're welcome to put those in there as well while they're talking. We'll keep an eye on that. I'd also like to thank the Bonfy Stanton Foundation, Colorado Creative Industries, and SCFD for their support of CPAC. And we're so excited to have, thankful for Zoom, so that we can have Adriene Hughes and Stephan Jahanshahi and Brad Temkin joining us this evening. Maybe I got it right, Stephan, you'll correct me later if I was wrong. So Changing Landscape brings together the work of Adriene, Stephan, and Brad, and each artist in their own way, surveying the natural landscape and opening our view to the adaptations of a place. As we all know, climate change is a complex topic, and photography is a way for us to see spaces through new eyes that can evoke an emotion or a different understanding of what we're seeing. And so with that, I am going to let Adriene start talking about her work, and let me just share my screen. All right, Adriene, I'm going to let you start.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Adriene Hughes. I am a multimedia photographer living in San Diego, California. And the current body of work that I've been working on since 2017 is this current project that has to do with climate change, the fire climate within the West Coast, and how trees communicate as a group. This project is entitled The Secret Life of Trees, and it's in 3 parts. And this particular section or group of images that is currently exhibiting is section 3. So I'll just say that I have been visiting Washington for over 20 years. This area of the forest I have visited many times and hiked like literally every year that I go, if not twice a year. But in 2017, a friend of mine who lives in the Puget Sound area asked me if I would help her drive her car from Los Angeles to Washington State. And it was in September. You probably won't remember because it seems like every summer now there are massive fires up and down the coast. But this particular time, there literally were fires in San Diego, Los Angeles, all the way up the coast, in Oregon, Washington, and in Canada. And some of the fires they were not trying to put out, they were just letting them burn simply because they were like deep within the forest and with no, no human safety being in concern. So we drove all the way up through thick orange smoke. It was pretty scary, actually. It was, being in California and we're accustomed to our fires, but I had never seen this much fire and smoke in my life living here in California. When we got up to Washington, I decided that I was going to go out into the forest and shoot. I shoot or use a infrared camera, and I had no idea what kind of outcome I would get using an infrared camera while shooting through a forest that was thick with orange haze. Now, infrared is a wavelength outside of our spectrum. So we see visible light, which is a very narrow visible light, which is the colors of the rainbow. but infrared lives outside of the spectrum of what we see. So an infrared camera can actually tap into colors and the ways in which trees and anything that is green or has chlorophyll, the way that it is perceived in an infrared state. So I photographed this forest for a couple of days. And when I started to process the images, I started to get really crazy outcomes from the images, not necessarily the way that I normally would, the kind of data and outcome that I would get from infrared in general. I spent a year just thinking about this. How is it that my images had this look that was unfamiliar to me in the infrared spectrum? And I'm a photographer that likes to work intuitively. Even though I sat and contemplated, it wasn't an intellectual process of elimination. Rather, this was an intuitive and, dare I say, spiritual connection to the experience that I had being in this forest. And the more I delved into it and the more that I thought about it, the trees were having a reaction, which is really what's going on. It's very difficult to see in these images, but each leaf, even a single leaf, will have a multitude of colors in it, because the way that a tree works is that the mother tree, or the center of their tree, feeds its limbs and its leaves sugar, right? So it goes up the trunk out to its limbs and feeds the leaves and keeps it alive. But I was getting a different reaction in these photographs, which was showing me that there was a signal being sent to the limbs of the trees, giving me a different response than I normally would have received through traditional infrared. And the only thing that I could come up with, and the way that I thought about it, was that trees are clumps of societies connected through a fungal network. And that all the way from Canada or from East Washington, signals, electronic signals, were being sent through the fungal network from patches of trees to trees to trees. They're all connected through this fungal network. And a distress signal was being sent from the forests that were actually being burned. So there was it was like a SOS call. It was a unique communication of signals going from forest to forest. And so therefore, what I was seeing was a unique response to this communication. The stitching in the imagery was my way of trying to imagine what would that communication look like if we could see it with our naked eye. Clearly, we can't see infrared because that's not a part of our spectrum. But what if we could feel and intuit how the earth felt, how the trees felt as a society, and also as a grouping of families? And the stitching became my way of trying to express my own intuition about that communication. In this particular set, I used quilting thread and quilting needles, also with quilting rulers, in order to measure out the distance between the thread and the way in which it would spread itself over a page. It's actually the way in which I would quilt fabric. I am, in my past, have been a quilter. I've made many quilts. And so thread, needle, and measuring tools have been a part of my narrative for over 25 years. So I just pulled out the tools that I had available to me and used these tools to express that concept of familia conversation, that network of electrical currents going from one tree group to another. So in a nutshell, that's what it's about.
Fantastic. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
Oops, I'm on the wrong. And I had one more. I thought I was to the end. And if you are in Denver and you do get a chance to seeing the work in person, we were talking about before we started the panel, and being able to kind of see the stitching really changes your understanding of the photographs. So.
Thank you. There's about 25 in the series right now, and only some are stitched with quilting thread. Other aspects of this project use embroidery floss, and then I also use wool as another modality of description.
Nice. Fantastic. Great. Stephan.
Hello, my name is Stephan Jahanshahi. Samantha, you were really close, so don't worry about it. I am an Iranian American artist currently based in Seattle, but I've kind of lived all over North America. And my body of work is called We Draw the Lines, but the Weather Decides, which was a direct quotation from the lead guide on this expedition, a woman named Sarah Gertis, as she explained where we could and could not land around the island of the archipelago of Svalbard, which is, I believe, the northernmost landmass in the world. It's about 2,000-ish miles north of Norway. And that statement, which became the title of the work, was in reference to kind of the plan of action for the guides to first make a landing by themselves, establish a perimeter for, kind of to be able to survey where the artists in this residency could and could not go, and then allow us to kind of make landing to make these photographs. Now let me back up a second. This was done through a residency program called the Arctic Circle Residency. So it was myself and a collection of other artists making work in the high Arctic region. How I found myself here is a little bit of a weird story, in that I don't consider myself a landscape photographer or a landscape artist. My practice up until now had only really talked about landscape in relation to its political and social implications, mostly in kind of congruence with my experience as an Iranian American, in the way that borders and land has been used to express either ownership or exclusion for diaspora communities. So I made work kind of about the political implications of landscape, and had intended to make that kind of work in the Arctic as well. You can move on to the next slide if you want to. But the place was so visually overwhelming and spoke for itself so well that I almost felt overwhelmed, and like it was maybe doing a disservice to this landscape to try to impose my own kind of politics onto it, or my own statements. So once I made it to Svalbard, my intention stopped being to make this work about borders, and to make this work as an expression of the way this place kind of was evolving and changing with and against human intention in regards to climate change. This is a space that I think a lot of people assume is othered or over there or far away, and kind of not connected to the implications of modern society. And one of the interesting things about a place like Svalbard, because it is so remote, is that the implications do kind of literally wash ashore on it. Every location that we came upon that we were able to make landing in had plastic debris and trash and just a variety of detritus from human interaction from other parts of the world. One of the most interesting elements of that was that an archipelago with no trees on it had logs wash ashore on almost every beach, most of which with Russian branding. So, logging from Russia from mainland Europe literally wash ashore 2,000 miles north of the continent. Another element that I wanted to address was kind of the human presence and scale. The most aggressive element or imposition on the landscape is definitely the weather. But I want to talk about the way that humanity kind of informs that with air pollution and carbon. So having people kind of displaced across the images in a minute kind of fashion was meant to kind of reference, like, you know, even though this is a space that we think of as wild or as untouched, we are very much touching it. Let's see the next one. This is kind of the best case of that example. Those little ants across the bottom of the screen on this detail shot, those are people that exist in the bottom center of that image of the fjord. Another element of Svalbard that I found really compelling is that it's officially classified terra nullius. There's a town called Longyearbyen that has a Norwegian mayor, but there's no country that's claimed claimed Svalbard as a territory. So it's a place that's kind of for everyone and also for no one. There's an adage amongst people on Svalbard that you can't be born or die there because there's no maternity ward in the hospital and there's no graveyard you can be born, you can be buried in. So there's literally no locals, with a very specific definition of that. Another element that was a response to the environment that I was in is the inclusion of the female body. This image is of one of the other guys, Kristen, and in fact, all of the human bodies represented in this project are female. That was the intention of the guides. Sarah gives us chose an all-female guiding crew, and the majority of the artists were also women. It was really kind of an interesting thing to me to see the way this work gets kind of gendered or misgendered because of the implication that women don't belong in wilderness, which is obviously absurd. And so just including that form and these bodies in a very powerful protective role, I thought was a really good and interesting element to the project. That's all I've got so far.
Great. Thank you, Stephan. Brad.
Hi, I'm Brad Temkin. I live in Chicago. This body work is called Rooftop. But before I talk about that, I just want to say that my practice pretty much focuses on how we accommodate nature and how it always makes us accommodate it. And I look at, I don't think we're trying to destroy nature. I think that we just do it out of our kind of the-ness. And the thing that's great, what I love so much about people, is that I love the way we fix things. Like when we're faced with a problem, we go after it. All the really bad stuff that happens needs to happen in order for good things to come out of it. And that's just my philosophy. And so I think I carry that in my pictures because I look at the world like it's a wondrous place. And so I respond to the beauty and wonder, and beauty is obviously it's my sharpest tool, but I also use like repetition, and these are just things that are throughout my work. So with Rooftop, I got interested in this because I had been photographing gardens for a while, and I got interested in that because I bought a house and I was doing a garden. And so for me, photography has always been something about learning about a subject that I'm interested in, and I make pictures on the way. And so I'd been printing this show of garden pictures called Private Places. And I had heard on the radio at NPR as I was in the darkroom that Chicago had a really strong and green initiative, and they were doing these gardens on rooftops. And so I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I can make some pictures around, look at gardens. But I started to look at it. And so the first green roofs that I photographed were actually rich people's penthouses. And, and as I was doing that, I realized that I had already done that. So I didn't want to photograph these beautiful gardens that, you sit and you read or you drink a beer or you meditate. I was interested in why these things were on roofs. And as it turned out, they're well designed, but they're not designed to have people. So there's people who are not to enjoy it. except for maybe the higher floors and what have you. So I was interested in that, and I was also interested in these roofs are all mimicking nature. And so we're fixing this problem, which in Chicago and New York and other cities is like a heat island effect, and where because of all the concrete, the sun hits down and it creates this heat, which then gets transferred over to other, by the wind, and it creates drought and things like that. Which then in turn, another thing that happens is that these buildings are so hot, so they have the green roofs they insulate, and they also do in some other cities, they're used for stormwater management because of all the impervious surfaces. The water would just kind of flood over and take the sewage and bring it into our drinking water. So there's all kinds of stuff that's happening. And I think what's cool about it is that we're solving that. We're kind of addressing that problem. We're not sitting there and saying, oh, no, it doesn't exist. We shouldn't do this. It's like, we are doing this. We're idiots. But at the same time, we realize that, hey, we got to do something about this. And then all of a sudden, greatness and grace and ingenuity comes through, and humor. And so I guess what I'm doing is documenting how we fix things and sort of how we integrate. We have like this delicate interdependence with the environment, and we then integrate it into to kind of make our lives more comfortable. And so Rooftop became a body of work where the architecture became the landscape, as opposed to having these interrupting buildings in a landscape and complaining about concrete. What ends up happening is we then say, well, we want to make this more like nature, and so we start to integrate it into nature, where the buildings then just become part of the landscape instead of being architectural forms. But I love the way we fix things, and this led to another body of work on water. And so it's all interconnected, and everything informs everything else for me. But the thing that stays pretty consistent is the wonder that I see in the world and the design. And these are all made with a 4x5 view camera, and except for the 2 helicopter ones, but everything else is made with a 4x5. And I would get permission to go on roofs. I didn't sit there and scurry up there. I would literally research cities and learn about why they have green roofs and what they do, and decide that, hey, this is really interesting, I want to learn more. And then I would go and I would kind of tool around the city and find these places, and people helped me. Like, this is Ford Motor Company, River Rouge. And the reason why that green roof exists is because the Ford Motor Company had toxins in soil. So they hired someone from Michigan State to help get indigenous Michigan plants that would help reduce that toxicity. And as they were doing that, it was the architect, William McDonough, and they started to build the green roofs. And so these structures, you see these little glass things, they have no sort of job except to let light into the factory. And what happens is the people that work there, they see light, they feel better, they work harder, they're more productive, and yet Ford Motor Company is also making up for some of their emissions that they put into the air, because this is where they make all the cars. This was the first place where they made a car from raw materials in one side, from everything from the glass and the tires and all that to the neck, through tunnels and all this stuff, and then comes out with a car. This was, it's an incredible place. And I think that it's nice that here are these people who we would get really upset about for polluting. They're saying, hey, we recognize that this is happening, and we're going to try and fix the problem by doing things, to kind of make up for our carbon footprint. And that's it. That's it's a lot of fun. And when it was over, it was I had a book that was published of it, and I just said I wanted to make a definitive statement, and when it was over, and I knew that I could make more pictures that I liked, but it wouldn't be true to what was really happening, which was that I need to move on. And, there was something else on the horizon, of course.
Brad, I had a question for you about this structure.
Yeah,
What is it?
it's how they wash the windows. So they've got the little cart, and this is on top of a roof at Jacob Bookholt's house. And it's at the very end. So that is a track to bring the whatever they call it, the thing that holds the guys. So that's what that's for.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I love that picture. That's in Basel.
Yeah.
But I love how the structure kind of goes off in the foreground and then finishes, so, and that, this like little form has happened in my pictures since I started making them. I mean, I've seen it kind of pop up in all these bodies of work for like 40 years. And it's kind of fun to see that that's how I see the world. So my advocacy is, of course, for nature, but it's not to sit there and like smash someone on the head and say, do this, do this. It's to get someone to come along with me and say, this is beautiful. I want to do this, like that kind of thing. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Well, and I know, Adrienne, you responded to Ed's question but I was curious, I wanted to hear more about, so a question came up for Adrienne about the book titled The Hidden Life of Trees, what they feel, how they communicate. And Adrienne said, she's aware of it, but I wanted you to expand a little bit more on that, like why you don't wonder. Oh, wait, you're on mute. Hang on.
That was my fault. I had it on mute. Yeah, I don't like to research too much or read material that could possibly influence my work. I would rather my work come from the personal and the experiential, because it has that added element of stitching into it, which is an additional communication that for me represents what I think is going on and how I relate to the environment. So if I read someone else's narrative about a thing such as tree communication, then it may alter my perception in the way that I would react to the environment if I had not read it. So I choose not to research at all for anything. I think it hinders my own creative juices, I guess, if you want to call it that, my own creative originality.
And I think that's what's so fantastic about photography and art in general, is that everyone comes to their process of their making a little differently, and I think each of you touched on that a little bit. Brad talking about how like the gardens and the private spaces led to the rooftops, which then led to the water, and kind of how you've developed those series. Because there's a lot of, in the rooftop work alone, there's a lot of work in that project. Obviously you have a book published, but then even exhibition wise, I took a small amount of, I only took 8. So, but yeah, I think if there's, can share a little bit more. And I think Stephan, you even touched on this a little bit as well, like that idea that, you're like, I'm not a landscape photographer, but here I am making images in the landscape and how those direct connections for you. And so I guess just kind of expanding a little bit more on like each of the environment and climate and how you're kind of making those pictures.
I can hop in for that.
Sure.
So Adrienne, I really appreciate your relationship to research. I try to read as many books about the thing I'm about to start making work about, and then I try to forget everything I read, which is at times a very kind of weirdly cumbersome process because I kind of want the best of both worlds, to kind of know what other people's responses have been to a space or to a even a concept if I'm making work that isn't necessarily spatially engaged. But then I want to forget their thing, so I have like also have like a personal reaction to it. So I'm not quite sure what the best way to go about that is. Maybe like read a whole bunch of books and then conk myself on the head after. But it is like I think a balancing act between paying homage to what other people have said about a space, and also making sure that you're not being unduly influenced by those perspectives. To kind of go back to what I said briefly in my opening piece, most of the research I had done about Svalbard was political. The ways in which it had changed hands between the Soviet Union and Norway, and then which countries in kind of our contemporary global society have research facilities there and which ones don't, and why that is. I had a lot of presumptions about the high Arctic and about kind of the nature of that space. And frankly, they're mostly presumptions that it was going to be a bit of a monolith. I was up there in June and was told the sun never set. And my very foolish presumption of that meant that I assumed that the light would never change, when in fact the light was changing every 20 minutes. So the research I did thankfully didn't influence me in my experience of the place physically, or kind of like it being in the moment of the space. I was really grateful to have kind of some historical context as to why the Soviet Union was there when they were there, why they left the way they did, why Norway has a mayor in one of the towns, but it has not claimed the rest of the archipelago. I felt like those were all really kind of interesting things to have in the back of my head as I was dealing with this space as a kind of a physical presence. But they weren't there in a way that interrupted my ability to just kind of be in these moments of kind of sublime awe of what this space actually was and how varied and not static they were. It really shattered my presumptions that the Arctic was a static place. So I'm really grateful that I didn't do too much homework. I was able to have that still kind of like personal experience of that landscape.
Mm-hmm. Brad, do you have a lot of research for your? I know you do.
I do research, but my work's all about the connection, and the connection is the moment, and it's about the moment in between moments, which has to do with things like if I stub my toe in the morning, or if I have a really good sleep the night before, or if the weather is really crap, or or the sun, the light is just great. Everything changes, even if it's the same place. So I learn about my subject because the reason why I photograph a subject is to learn about it, because I'm interested in it. And what ends up happening is that experience then comes back through me, and it influences the pictures I make. But the pictures I make all are really connected to me at the moment. And what I read doesn't really influence the way I make pictures, but it does give me a starting point for some things that I want to see. Usually my best pictures come after making all the really obvious ass kickers in the beginning, because those really, in my opinion, those are pictures that you are making because you think it's good, but not necessarily because of the connection. And in order to have that connection, I think you need to have that sort of relationship and experience with your subject. So when Adriene was talking about going back to the forest, each time, it was obviously something from the other thing was informing the next picture she made. And then when she printed them, that would be another thing where she would decide intuitively, as she was saying, I think, how she would stitch it. But so that's just the process. For me, my process happens at the moment. And then afterwards, I listen to my pictures, and the way I interpret them or print them is very much the same sort of process that Adriene does with the stitching or whatever you. Sometimes it's not exactly how I pre-visualized it. So I do pre-visualization and post-visualization. And so, the experience is much more important than the pictures. The pictures I love my pictures, don't get me wrong, but to me, they're just biscuits. You know, I mean, the ones that I really respond to, it's a biscuit saying, keep going, you're going the right direction, man. And, but the experience is really, you know, that's what my work is all about. And it's, I don't see it changing. And also I have faith that, that, you know, if I listened to what people told me about my pictures or about work, I would have quit a long time ago. I mean, because it would have been, it's too difficult. I mean, I make the pictures because it feeds me to the point of, you know, I can exist.
Absolutely. Well, we have a couple good questions for both Adriene and Brad. So Adriene, Susan was curious about the centers of the images versus the perimeters, the center green and the perimeters not green. Did you alter the color balance, or is this close to what the infrared sensor gave you, altered by the smoke?
The second, yeah, I didn't alter it. It's what the sensor picked up. So the sun is actually being bent through the smoke, right? So it acts as like a gossamer or like a fog. And we all know when you shoot in fog, light actually disperses. It becomes like a gossamer in a way. So in this way, the sun's light was bent through the smoke and gave me, and because of the orange nature of the smoke, it gave me a different response. And so the images are a direct correlation to the reaction to the infrared and the smoke.
So then in that, so I have a follow, in that greenish, like is the green still the portions that are maybe not burnt versus the areas that are?
Yeah, so I have a unique way of processing infrared that is not the way that you're supposed to. And by doing this, I pick up different types of data. And my goal sometimes is to put the green back, to try to put the green back into the image. And when I do that, then the world lights up. And what I see is the undulation of the sugars and the water and the electrical signals from the fungus. Just, it reacts in a completely different way. So it's just more of a technical experiment on my part, and also my curiosity as to the technology itself.
No, it's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then the other question for you, Brad, was, did you determine which green roofs were perhaps mandated by codes in different places, or if building owners chose to add them on their own?
Yes. So, well, I was saying yes to that whole thing is yes. That's why I said that. But, you know, with the green roofs, some of the cities that I visited was because of the mandate and because of why they did it. It was mostly, you know, like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh were very much about water, stormwater management. New York was very much about the green heat island effect. Chicago was about the heat island, but the people that started it, I researched who the landscape architects were and who built it. And so I got really lucky and I got hooked up with the Green Roofs for Healthy Cities people. I guess they saw the work and we just talked and so they had actually, as I was doing this, they liked that. And so I basically interviewed a lot of the leaders in the green roof industry and why they did certain things. And, you know, a lot of them, it was like a team. So it reminded me of like blowing glass or, you know, playing music. It was all collaborative and it was, you know, like everybody put in. And so one person who is an engineer said, you know, that, oh, but the reason why there's a tree on City Hall is because he mimicked nature with the root system, but there's really only 6 inches of dirt on the roof, but there's a whole root system that goes underneath that. And so that's engineering. And then the waterproofing and the barrier and then the design, it was really cool to see that come through. So I saw that, but after a while, I could walk in a city and I would see green roofs. I knew where they were, and I would then, if it looked like it was interesting building architecturally, I figured that the roof would probably be cool. So I'd go and I would research who I would have to get access with, and I would do that. I mean, one of the roofs was like 55 floors up, and it was really pretty cool, very windy, and it was interesting to learn about it. So I hope that answers the question. That's why I said yes, because it's like all of that. If it's interesting, I make the picture. If it's not, like there was one of the first roofs I made. I'm sorry, I'm yammering,
No,
but
you're
it was in New York City, and I read about this guy who had a building in Soho, and he was going to lose his building because the landlord, and he had this green roof for like 20 years, and he was going to lose that because the landlord just decided to sell it and make it into a parking lot. And so I went there just to go, and I literally, it was like really weird. So here's this whole chance thing that goes on. I land on the plane. It was like just a quick, I'm going there tomorrow. So I get my plane ticket. I go to New York. I land. It's beautiful. I get in the cab to get to the bus, and it's like lashing rain, and just lashing. And I figured I'm screwed. And it's like 4 p.m., right? So there's not that much light. I go to the apartment that I'm staying at. I drop off my stuff, and all of a sudden the sun comes out. So I get down to Soho. I knock on this guy's door, and the guy lets me up, and I go on his roof, and it's got like this pool, and it was something that I didn't even know would exist there. And that was the experience. And if I went another time, if it didn't rain and pour and have that break by chance, that picture would have never been made, So it's all chance. So
Yeah.
And Adrienne, someone else had another question about process for you about, do you swap red and green channels?
No.
Perfect. And Susan said to thank you both. And Brad, is the kind of information you just shared in the book?
Yeah, there's actually a bunch of text in the book. One written by the guy from Green Roofs for Healthy Cities, about biophilia, which is a philosophy I got interested in because of this. I mean, I was always interested, but I can call it that now. And then an architect who was part of City Hall and Rouge, and then a curator from the Amon Carter Museum talking about the work and visually the relationship. So I think it would give you that information. Yeah. And it's a beautiful book, I have to say.
It is a beautiful book, and we have some in the gallery there. It is really nicely done by Radius.
Yeah, and you can actually use the book cover as like a food tray because it's plastic, so.
Stephan, someone asked if you're still in contact with any of the pictured guides, and how have they received the images?
Yeah, I am in digital contact with all 4 of them. I think the consensus was they preferred the ones where they were facing away, just because everyone feels kind of weird being photographed sometimes. They're a very interesting group of people, and I think weren't entirely sure what my photographing them meant at the time, like how the images were going to end up being placed in the world, if that makes any sense. And I hope they like them. They express positive responses to them.
Nice, fantastic. And someone else was curious about your about what you said about human impact, and wondering if experiencing the high Arctic made you more or less hopeful about climate change and our role in reversing it.
I don't necessarily know if I feel optimistic about a reversal. I feel more optimistic about the Earth's ability to absorb our impacts, and that it will change instead of die in like an apocalyptic kind of way. My conception of climate change before making this trip was very much informed by more of a doom and gloom narrative that I think we have a lot of in our kind of news cycle. There's a lot of reporting on the topic that makes it sound like we're just screwed and there's nothing to do about it. And my experience in the high Arctic really, really reaffirmed that the Earth is a space that's going to absorb and change, and it might not change in ways that are great for humanity, but life will go on and have a larger scale. And that knowing that it's more a case of how can we be conscious in our participation in that change as opposed to kind of a definitive endpoint is kind of where I find optimism.
Nice. And you're getting a handful of questions now. So Susan asked if she followed correctly, the land where you are in is now Norwegian and had been Russian. Is this area distant from the areas where Russia is trying to establish strong presence as land opens up as ice melts? Hope that makes sense.
I'm unaware of its proximity to other landmasses as far as the current projected trade routes. There are Russia, Canada, the US as always, and I think China as well are all trying to speculatively claim parts of the high Arctic, assuming that the permafrost and the pack ice will melt and shipping lanes will open up there. Svalbard is, I don't believe, engaged in any of the locations that are under current disputes or discourse. I think discourse is better. I don't think we're disputing yet, but people are talking about who will get to use those trade routes when they do open up. It actually doesn't belong to Norway or Russia. There was a Soviet era mining town called Pyramiden that was a coal mine that operated on the archipelago, I believe until the mid 80s. And was then evacuated in a single day because of the nature of Soviet bureaucracy. And it's a wild place. If anyone ever gets to go, it's a little hard to get to, but it's a wild place to see because it was just, people, there are weights in the gym. There's film reels in the projection booth of the cinema in this town. They just got up and left in one day. So it's a very it's a very weird spot to be in, but it's officially terra nullius. There's a Norwegian mayor of the town Longyearbyen that has an airstrip in it, but the archipelago isn't under anyone's governance. In fact, there are some displaced refugee populations up there. People who had flown to Europe to seek refugee status have been turned away instead of returning to their home country. They actually were able to fly to Longyearbyen. So there's I believe a Vietnamese community up there. There's an Iranian man who escaped the revolution, was turned away from refugee status in Norway and flew to Longyearbyen. He's just been hanging out there for 30 plus years now. So it really is a place that is almost designed for exiles, which I find really compelling. I'd love to make a second body of work about that.
Interesting. Awesome, thank you. And I also we have a few minutes left if anyone else has any other questions for the photographers. And Stephan had one more question for you about because I know in your statement you referenced that when you were there photographing, it was the hottest summer on record. Do you know, since then, because that was, I think, 2017, how, has there been hotter summer? I mean, as we see climate changing and...
My understanding is that we've had hotter peak days since then, but that 2016, which was the year that I was up there, was the hottest season, summer season, or the second hottest summer season. But one of the things that Svalbard makes the news for regularly is that's the home of the International Seed Vault, which is a project. I'm not sure who runs it, but it's a project in which they dug a seed vault into the permafrost to house the largest collection of plant ephemera and seeds in the world. And the year after I left in 2017, the permafrost melted and the seed vault flooded. The specimens were saved and nothing was damaged, but the idea that it's 30 feet underground in the permafrost and even there wasn't safe from climate change was a very sobering kind of headline to read, especially having been there and seen the place.
That's crazy. And Adrienne, I know this is a little different because we're showing your wildfire work, but you also have some work that is in the Arctic as well, I believe.
Yes, I went to the high Arctic in 2015, and I have to say that I did do a bit of research about the language of the Inuit, but there again, it was just more of a reference to the experience that I had there. But it's quite alarming. I think what's more alarming about, even though the Arctic is melting and splintering, and so is Antarctica, I mean, we know that the Earth is warming, is that there are going to be a lot of people displaced, especially the Inuits who live in Greenland. They are directly impacted, their lifestyle, the way that their culture, the way that they fish. They put a cap on how many whales that they can acquire a year. You know, just their whole general way of living is being mediated by white people. So it's quite shocking that a whole culture and society of people, their way of living is being directly influenced because of the way that we mediate that environment and how we're trying to lay claim to Greenland, specifically for oil. And yeah, and Stephan's right, it's the Russians, it's the Chinese, and America. We're all trying to, I think even Donald Trump made a joke about trying to buy Greenland. He wanted to see if he could buy it. Do you remember that? He made some nonsense comment about buying Greenland.
It wasn't a joke. He really was.
Yeah.
You know, he was doing that. He's, you know, but.
Right. I mean, yeah. So it wasn't a joke, but he really thought he could buy it. So, you know, yeah, there's a lot happening, and a lot of innocent people will be hurt because of it. So anyway.
Well, I mean, I think we'll figure a way. We always do. You know, I mean, we've pillaged people, you know, people have pillaged people since history began. And I think what happens is we're all becoming more conscious of it, and it's not acceptable, and we want to change it. People are getting, you know, they're going to get uncomfortable to the point of changing it. And you can see the change that's happening now, you know, I mean, and if you trace back, I mean, just genocides for centuries and centuries, you know, and now instead of like turning your head away from it, like they did with the Turks and Armenians, you know, what Turkey did with Armenia, I mean, they just like turn their head away from it. People are not turning their head. They're getting a little pissed off. And, you know, from that sort of framing of it, change is happening, and it's always going to do that. And yeah, you know, there's no excuse for what people do and how we displace the Native Americans and the Aborigines and, you know, the African Americans, and just but you know, we're work in progress, and we're not that smart, so we just kind of have to be aware. And it's things like, you know, this show and your stance and Stephan's stance, and, you know, to do things about it. And after a while, people will come to that if they can get convinced to do it, you know, if it's good for them. So it'll change. It always does. I don't mean to, like, you know, I just think it'll change.
Well, I mean, what I meant was the Inuits are directly, so their lifestyle has changed so much that alcoholism is at its highest, obesity, poverty, and we've influenced their culture to the point where they're not living the life that they were meant to live, simply because the way that Western cultures have infiltrated the Arctic. So yeah, you know, not to be too political here or to debate the finer points of the politics of the Arctic, I do think that that the earth itself will mend and the earth will come back. I really do, I really do think that. So whatever happens to us, who knows? But the earth, Mother Earth always survives.
Did you remember Peter Beard had a book called The End of the Game? And in it, he talked about there's only two species that can completely destroy their environment and make themselves extinct, and that was humans and elephants. And for different reasons. And we're just, I just know that, yeah, maybe the earth is going to be different, but when we're done, we're done. I don't think that I think we're survivors. I think that we become our best when we're faced at our worst. That's, it's like the movie Starman. Jeff Bridges says that's exactly what he says. He said, what I love about you is that when you're at your very worst, you become your very best. And that's humans. That is why, that's why I believe what I believe. I really think that that's what it's about. And it takes that in order for you to be able to rise up to that place, because otherwise you won't. There's a really good book called Imagine. I just happen to have it right here. Jacob Lear, and he talks about that when he brings up things like he's got one chapter called Bob Dylan's Brain. And he talks about, the whole notion of interacting with, why things happen. And they happen because you're not comfortable with it, because you have to change it. And with creativity, because it says how creativity works, that's really what he's talking about. And it's just really interesting that I just think that people, that's what we do. When we have the problem, we either fix it or we perish. And so far we haven't perished, and I don't think we're gonna. So, I have belief in us. We're good. And one thing I wanted to say about Stephan, you were talking about something, and I actually wrote it down when you were talking, and you're saying about people in the Arctic and the high Arctic and that. But the fact of the matter is, with people, we're everywhere. I mean, there is not anywhere that we aren't. And it's, you can look at it and say that's unfortunate, but it's kind of cool because it's again about our relationship with nature and our interaction.
I don't think it's unfortunate that we're everywhere. I think more so just, I think that there was maybe in the past, there's been an implication that there's there's a place on the earth that is untouched by us or that we are not affecting. And so you think about your interactions or the way that you go through life as kind of not affecting a place like the Arctic. Like if you live in the United States or in South America or Africa or wherever, you just think like, my impact is on my immediate surroundings only. And the reality is that's not true. Our actions have global implications. And I don't think that means that we should not be acting, but that we should be acting in a way that's conscious of that. There is no over there. Everywhere is local at this point. The things that we're doing here impact the entire world. We need to kind of make sure that we're doing our very best to navigate that appropriately, or in a way that's positive for as many people as possible. I don't think there shouldn't be people. Like
no, me neither.
We're great.
We're everywhere.
Yeah, but I think that just being trying to be as aware of that as possible, I think is
awareness.
A thing. Yeah,
that's the key. All about awareness.
And I was asleep to it until I went to this incredibly remote place and still saw human impact there. So I'm very thankful to have had that opportunity. I hope more people get to experience similar things. So I hope the Arctic sticks around.
Me too.
Well, I wanted to, it doesn't seem that there are any other questions, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us this evening, and to the artists for sharing about your process. I think that's the other most important part about the work. The work is made and it's fantastic. And if you are in Denver, please stop by the gallery. The show's up till June 26th, but hearing the process and how you got there or how the work is being made. And so thank you to all of you for sharing that. So I really appreciate it and so excited to have all the work together in the gallery.
Thank you for the opportunity to show the work, Sam.
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you so much, Samantha.
It was
Yeah.
really nice to meet you guys too.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.